Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Today, I sat down to install one of my most used programs, Dragon Naturally Speaking. Now, I use Dragon a lot in the membership site, on our courses, and also for email. So, when I got a notification that a newer version of Dragon was available, I paid my dues and downloaded the software, and then I started to install it. Except, it wouldn't install. The software informed me that I needed to upgrade from Yosemite to El Capitan, which is the Mac's current operating system. And therein lies the problem. All my computers were humming nicely on Yosemite, and there seems to be no reason to rock the boat to install a new operating system. At least if I were having some trouble with the existing system, it would be worth the trouble. But I was doing just fine. Then along came this new version of Dragon, and it was forcing me to do something that involved a whole lot of risk. When you're in a job, it's like living in Yosemite land. It's not the best thing ever, and you know that there is a world of entrepreneurship, and you'd rather explore that. But it's safe in Yosemite land, so why make that leap into the unknown? And how do you know that things will work out anyway? And you don't. That's the whole point of being an entrepreneur. You have no clue if or when things will work out. The only thing you know for sure is that change is going to happen. That the dragon wants to be let loose in your world and you're holding back. I understand there's a huge difference between installing software and taking a leap from a job into the world of business. I know that the fear is a lot greater when you have a family, you have a mortgage, and you have bills to pay. Yet, there comes a time when your hand seems to be forced. You can stay where you are, or you can take the leap. In this series, we deal with 3 recurring questions dealing with making that leap. The first is managing the fear, the second is keeping the vision strong, and the third is focus, and why you need a hatchet person to get you to focus. Let's start out with the first thing, which is managing the fear. I hated my job as a web designer. I just immigrated to Auckland, New Zealand in February of 2000, and my first priority was to find a job. Compared with India, where I came from, Auckland was terribly expensive. And anyway, I couldn't see myself starting up in business right away. To my utter amazement, I found a job that was going to pay me $50,000 a year just to build websites. But by the second day, I was ready to quit. My wife, Renuka, wasn't so sure. To get a job that was reasonably well-paying was not an easy task. At the time, she was still in India, and she asked me to hang on until she showed up in the following month. She decided she would get a job of her own, and then I could quit if I wanted. And she said so. She said, "You can do whatever you want after I get there." However, things don't always pan out the way we imagine. When Renuka got to New Zealand, she found it hard to find a job that fit her position. For the next few months, she bounced between temporary jobs, and at least at that time, my job was the one that paid most of the bills and the mortgage. Because just 3 months after we entered the country, we went and bought ourselves a house, and then we had a mortgage of $200,000. The week after we bought the house, I was made redundant. What I experienced was close to a no-choice situation. Now, it wasn't entirely no choice. I could have clambered back into the job market. I could have got myself another job. After all, I was pretty good at Photoshop, illustration, and I had a decent track record with copywriting. Instead, I decided to say goodbye to the workplace once and for all. Now, put yourself in my shoes for a second. You are in a new country. You have no family in this country. You have only the choice of temporary jobs. And there's the small problem that you have a mortgage of $200,000. So, with this in mind, you have to make a decision. A no-choice situation doesn't give you time to be fearful. And all the fear that you feel, it comes from waiting. While you're waiting to quit your job, 1,000 thoughts go through your head, and you wonder if you're making the right decision. You wonder about your future, you wonder about the future of your family. All of this build-up, all of this frustration. And I was in a position where I really didn't know what to do or whom to trust. And yet, the outcome has already been decided well in advance. The reason you're listening to this podcast is because you too want to escape from that cubicle, but you don't know how. And no one can answer that question for you. No one can tell you the right time to quit. To find out if it's going to work, you're going to have to force a redundancy. Bass guitarist Paul Wolf had a real problem back in 2008. This is his story.
2000, 2005, 2006 were both fabulous years. We had some really busy months. We were doing really well. And things were going really nicely. And then what happened? Lehman Brothers went bankrupt on September the 15th in 2008. And literally the day they went bankrupt, the phone stopped ringing. And it didn't ring for the best part of a year. The next year, we did 20% of the previous year. So it was an absolutely traumatic and disastrous event. And soon it became pretty clear that things weren't going to change fast. This wasn't going to be something that there was a dip for 3 months or 6 months. It was clear that this was something that was going to be a lot longer than that to sort out. And then the next thing that became clear was that I needed to find another source of income reasonably quickly, or everything was going to come tumbling around me and I was staring bankruptcy in the face and things like that. Not pleasant things. In hindsight, Lehman Brothers going bankrupt actually turned out to be one of the best things that could have happened. It forced me to get into dealing with how to sell online, what to sell, what to put together, and so on. And the band business has never come back. I eventually sold the band business in 2013, I think it was, for less than £5,000. And when you factor in that what was the height of our period of success, we were turning over more than £300,000. That shows you how much it was now worth and what had changed, how it changed so dramatically. And the bass guitar thing keeps rolling along, keeps getting steadily slightly more than the year before. So it's been a massive life changer. Several years it's been like a 40-50 hour a week job for me, but now it's getting to the stage where I'm now starting to outsource things. But it also has been life changing because it's now putting me in a position where in the not too distant future, and we're talking months rather than years, I should have 1, possibly 2, maybe even 3 days a week to spend on doing passion projects rather than having to do projects to generate revenues.
Having a no-choice situation is probably one of the ways to deal with fear. You have to take the plunge, and so you do. The longer you wait, the more fear keeps you paralyzed. The reason why you're listening to this podcast is because reader Kai Huang asked me to write about how to make the leap. And this was one of the first questions, which is, how do you deal with fear? And the answer is, you can't. Once I was made redundant, I enjoyed the quiet for a few days, and then I started knocking on doors. I went back to what I knew best, and I decided to sell my cartoons to advertising agencies, to magazines, to newspapers. I was lucky that the internet was still an unviable place back then. I was lucky that ebooks and fancy software was still to take off. If that were the case, I might have built a website and sat around and waited for a stream of clients to come through the door. But I didn't have that luxury. And so I decided to go out and do what freelancers do to this day. They go out and they meet clients. They get freelance assignments. They then spend the time working on those assignments and they get paid. If you sit around hoping that something magical is going to happen, there's a pretty good chance you'll be back in your cubicle faster than you think. What I did was I got work freelancing. I taught some people how to use Photoshop. And then slowly but surely, I made my first presentation. Now, you know the story. That presentation was a disaster. And then the fear comes rushing back. But with practice, that fear went away. I spoke at tiny events like at Rotary clubs, and with every outing, I tried to sell the spindly version of the brain audit. Back then it was just 20 pages. And the fear, it started to diminish. In 2001, a year after we moved to Auckland, Renuka quit her job. She had a high-paying job at the beauty and cosmetic giant L'Oreal. But she also had a 2-hour daily commute. She had a rancid workplace atmosphere. She had a boss that took credit for everything. If you've met Renuka, you know she's a happy, jumpy person. And yet, some days she'd come home with tears in her eyes. Then one day she decided she had enough. She just quit. Now, we were still saddled with our mortgage. With all the freelancing, it wasn't like I was earning a lot. But we decided we couldn't deal with the jobs. We needed to cover our bills, and that's what we'd do. We cut back on our spending. We had a budget of just $150 a month for entertainment. So no matter where we went out, $150 was our limit. If we spent that in 3 days, then the next 27 days we couldn't do anything else. And so we did what we needed to keep ourselves happy. And yet, Renuka wasn't quite done with her career. Even back then, we'd go for a walk every day. And every day, it seemed like I was asking her the same question. And my question was, what will you do if something happens to me? And her response was almost identical every single time. She would say, I'll just get a job. So this is 2016 and that was 2001. We were more scared when we had the jobs than when we had no safety net at all. I'm not saying that your story will turn out like ours. I'm just saying that the fear is greatest where you are right now, in that job. That once you get out of the job, you'll have to do something. It won't be easy. It may take a year and maybe even more. But the fear, that'll be gone. It'll be gone forever. So this brings us to the end of the first factor, which is the fear factor, which is just dealing with fear. But let's say we make the leap. How do we then maintain a sense of vision? How do we handle focus? Let's start out with vision, because that's the one thing that'll keep you going when things get tough. Let me give you the short version of my vision. You probably know this, but back in 2000, my website had the embarrassing name of $1,000,000. That, in short, was my vision. And yet, it wasn't my vision at all. Back in India, when I got my first job at Chaitra Leo Burnett, I had a very kind and protective boss. Her name was Tanaz Kalyaniwala. And all around me, there were creative people whose company I really enjoyed. Despite the generosity, despite the warmth of the people around me, I yearned to be free and do what I liked, and I wanted to do things when I wanted to do it. Which meant that if it were a rainy day and I wanted to stay at home and do nothing, that's exactly what I could do. If I asked for leave, my boss never said no, but I didn't like the thought of asking. So my earliest vision was to simply be free to do whatever I pleased. But this vision clashes strongly with reality. Sure, you can do whatever you please when you have your own business, but you still have to earn some revenue. And so I had to go out there and I had to make sure that I met with potential ad agencies. I had to meet with editors. And this is when I had the cartooning business. When I moved over to marketing, it was all about getting in touch with potential clients. And then there were these incredibly mindless meetings. Meetings where you spend 3 hours debating whether the logo should move 1/8 of an inch to the left or to the right. And then you add early morning drives to make presentations. And you add all the stuff that you need to learn and all the stuff that you need to do, and the vision seems to be nowhere in sight. And yet it's there. Vision is that idea that refuses to go away. In 2004, we'd only been selling the Brain Audit online for a little over a year. We'd done 2 workshops for companies, and we even did one of our own workshops. Even so, there was no reason to be optimistic, because we worked all week and we worked on weekends as well. Getting a business off the ground, it seemed quite rough. And it's not like we had a lot of expenses. We were operating from a spare bedroom. We didn't even have a computer of our own. Renuka would sit at the computer for an hour, and then it would be my turn. And then an hour later, she would push me off, and it was her turn again. So we didn't go around buying fancy equipment. Even the books that we read were all from the library. Everything seemed to be okay, but the vision was shriveling. It seemed like we were moving away from the reason why we started up in business. We didn't start the business to get $1 million, even though that was the name of the company. We started it to get more free time. It wasn't about doubling our income and getting millions of clients. And this is why 2004 became our benchmark year. We decided to do something incredibly crazy in that year. We decided to take 3 months off, just like that. Your vision may not be about taking 3 months off. It might be to buy that mansion on the hill. It might be to take over half the countryside. You may love the fact that you have 100,000 people on your list. Now, we didn't care much for all those trappings. For us, the vision of the 3-month vacation embodied who we were, embodied who we are today. So when we take 3 months off, we have to make the other 9 months really count. When you hear me speaking, it sounds as if I always had this vision that was there right from the start. But it wasn't. It was there for a little while and then it went away. And then we had to claw it back. And we still keep tweaking the way we work, how we take our vacations. And I think the best way to describe vision is to use the concept of the tuna sandwich. You probably read or heard about this tuna sandwich episode because it was covered in podcasts before. And here's how it goes. There's this story in the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, and how Calvin is drawing up his list for Santa Claus. At which point, Calvin turns to Hobbes and he says, "What would you like for Christmas?" And Hobbes says, "I'd like a tuna sandwich." And Calvin thinks that Hobbes is crazy because Calvin has a list that has rocket launchers and trains and boats and a whole bunch of stuff that he wants for Christmas. And all Hobbes wants is a tuna sandwich. Then Christmas morning arrives, and Calvin is now throwing a massive tantrum because Santa hasn't brought him all the stuff that he wanted. And Hobbes is sitting there with a big smile on his face and saying, "I got my tuna sandwich." And we too can have a tuna sandwich. I think about my tuna sandwich every single day, even after all of these years. Vision is extremely hard to hold on to when you're making the leap. It sounds insane to do what you set out to do when there's so much other stuff to be done. But we kept that vision simple and we worked around it. You know the funny thing about that $1 million? Today we could stop working and we could live the life after 3-month vacation for the next 30 years or more. We ditched the $1 million idea and it came right after us. Instead, we focused on what was important, our work, our clients, and our break time. And in doing so, we continue to create the products that we want. We go to places that we want. We do the things that we want. The vision, if you keep it strong, will break through at some point in time. It might flicker. It might seem like it's dying out. And yet, it can break through. It took almost 4 or 5 years before we felt comfortable in terms of revenue and clientele. Even then, there were some ups and downs. But the vision, it's always strong, and you want to keep it simple because so you know exactly what your tuna sandwich is all about. And this takes us to the third question, our third point. Why focus is going to need a hatchet person? So what's a hatchet person and why is it connected with focus? We've gone well past the 20-minute mark, so I think let's do the hatchet on this podcast and take it to the second part. And we'll continue the hatchet person concept in part 2 of this episode. So let's summarize what we've done today. 2 things, very simple things. The first thing that you feel is fear. And fear comes from waiting. So the best thing you can do is create a sort of redundancy for yourself. When is that going to happen? Is it going to happen right away or is it going to happen a year from now? I can't say which one is good for you. I can only say that the longer you wait, the more fearful you get. And that's how I felt with all the time that I was waiting. So the faster you force the redundancy, the better for you, because then you will have to start to work. You'll have to start to find freelancing assignments. You'll have to do stuff that you hadn't considered before. The second element is just your vision. Vision is what enables you to stay strong, and that vision will flicker and you'll get buried under work and you'll be working weekends and life will seem almost frustrating for a while. But if you keep that vision strong, you will either make $10 million like you wanted to do, or you will do what we wanted to do, which is to go on vacation, to have that time. Whatever your vision is, it's your vision. No one can tell you it's the right thing or the wrong thing, or it's ethical or unethical. There is no such thing. You have your vision, keep it strong, get it going. And really, that brings us to the end of this podcast. one thing that you can do is you can define what that vision is going to look like. I want to thank Kai Huang for suggesting this topic, because I know that a lot of you are asking these questions. I get these emails every day, but Kai has been quite persistent, and he sent me the questions as well, which helped me then put all of this together. And it became more of a personal story of what we did and how we overcame it. And I just want to thank him for that. In the meantime, what we're doing is I'm preparing myself for We Are Podcast, the event in Australia. So if you want to come there and listen to how the podcast made a difference and how to tell stories, then it's wearepodcast.com, and it's very soon in October. So if you're in Australia, then it's just next door. If you have to fly to Australia, then it's quite a trip. If you're going to fly to Australia, you might as well fly to New Zealand next year. We have an event there. It's going to be fun. It's in February next year, around Valentine's Day. And that's at psychotactics.com/x2017. Other than that, make sure that you read your copy of the Brain Audit, especially if you're going to make that leap. You need that copy of the Brain Audit. People ask me, should they join 5000 BC if they don't have a business? My answer is yes, I would suggest you do, not because I want you to join 5000 BC. We've got a lot of members there already, but it's kind of preparation for what you're going to do in the future, and bouncing your ideas, getting your pages ready, getting your website ready. All of that can be done now while you're waiting for that redundancy moment. So, are you asking me if 5000 BC is a good place? I would say so. And on that note, I will say bye for now, and we'll continue this episode shortly in part 2.